You are listening to the K-State Radio Network, and once again, thanks for joining us for Agriculture Today. Water availability to the cow herd, always critical as we get into the warmer weather, and assuredly as we've dry conditions around a fair part of Kansas now, it's something that you producers need to be attuned to as we get into this hotter part of the year. We've some thoughts along the line of providing water to the cow herd now from Justin Waggoner. He's a research and extension beef systems specialist for K-State based in southwest Kansas. Justin, sure, there are natural water supplies, ponds, streams, and so forth that producers have relied upon in the past as they pasture their cow herd. Those in many quarters of the state are rather dry, so supplemental watering may be in order.
That's correct, Eric. That was really the impetus behind this article, just trying to put out some information that I thought might be helpful, especially as we look at those situations where we're probably going to be hauling some water for a little bit this summer.
And that article, by the way, is in the latest edition of the Beef Tips newsletter from K-State Animal Sciences and Industry. We'll later remind you about that and refer you to it. When we think about the water requirements of the individual cow, that's probably the place to start here. And there's some background information on this, Justin.
That's right. You know, there's an old rule of thumb out there that says cows essentially need about 1 to 2 gallons of water per 100 pounds of body weight. Now, obviously, it's a very general rule of thumb. Voluntary water consumption on cows is influenced by several things. Two of the big things really being, you know, how big is that cow, what's our mature body weight. And the other one is really lactation or milk production. Obviously, milk has a pretty large water component, so that's going to contribute to that, especially if we've got cow-calf pairs. And so, you know, as we look at, you know, how those things are influenced, you know, especially ambient temperature, really as we go above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which we typically are this time of year, water consumption increases such that we need about an additional gallon of water for every 10-degree increase in temperature. So, for example, you know, if we take a 1,300-pound cow, if she's a dry cow and we're at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, her voluntary water consumption is going to be around a little over 9 gallons of water a day. Now, if we take that same cow, we have her at about 25 pounds of milk production, let's say that's peak lactation, and we happen to be up there around 90 degrees. Then her water consumption is going to look more like around 20 gallons of water per day. So there's quite a bit of difference, you know, almost a twofold increase from that 9 to almost 20 gallons of water per day on that cow.
This is based on research which was conducted a couple of years ago, as a matter of fact, and you do have a chart in the aforementioned article that walks producers through the individual cow weights and the likely milk production and calculating that gallons of water per day. That'd be a good exercise for one to go through, Justin.
That's right, and one of the things we, you know, just to point out is that actually in our beef cattle nutrient requirements, a lot of the data that we use on water consumption is actually becoming fairly dated. Some of our most recent edition that came out here a few years ago actually uses water requirement data from the 50s. Now, it's still very valid, but we also know that the cattle have changed a little bit, and that hopefully our ability to predict those things has gotten a little bit better. So the numbers that are in that table, if you do happen to go look at the article online, that you're going to see, those would be really put in the context of a more modern cow that would probably be very representative of what we have. The other limitation, as you can see, and even in my numbers, we really don't have much of an ability or really much data. We are getting more as temperatures exceed that 90-degree mark. Yeah. Now, obviously in the summer in Kansas, we get a lot hotter than 90 degrees, and what I can tell you is that those numbers are really just the base requirement. We may need much more than that, especially as we get to daytime temps that may exceed 100 degrees, especially if we've got to factor in humidity as well. In
any event, if you've a normally sized cow out there, she's going to be pushing upwards of 20 gallons plus per day in water consumption. So this can total up pretty quickly.
If we have a lactating cow, yes.
All right. Another question among those you receive about this, the capacity of that tank that you're using to water cattle, just how much water is in it. Now, one may know this when they purchase the tank, but is there any way to calculate that fairly simply?
Yeah, there actually is a way, and I know many of us, including myself, have an aversion to mathematics, especially higher mathematics, or at least most cattlemen anyways, except when it comes to markets. But if you have a circular tank capacity, it's a really kind of simple geometry. If we take 3.14 times the radius squared in inches times the depth of that tank, so divided by 231, that'll give us that circular tank capacity in gallons. So if we take a 12-foot stock tank that's got 24-inch sides, that tank's going to hold 1,691 gallons of water. That would actually hold enough water for about 85 lactating beef cows. So we've got plenty of water capacity there in that 90-degree weather situation. And so that kind of leads to the third question that we have to kind of address as we begin to talk about water and tank is really tank space. So a tank of given capacity will service X number of cattle. Now, if we do that, we have to calculate the circumference of that tank. And that one's actually, it's once again falls back on basic geometry, but if we take 3.14 times the diameter of that tank in inches, that gives us the total distance around that circular tank. So that same 12-foot stock tank, 144 inches in diameter, has a circumference of 452 inches. Now, typically, and numbers vary on this depending on which source you want to pick out of the literature. In general, cattle need a minimum of 12 to 15 inches of linear tank space. Now, some sources will go up to 24 inches. A big factor in this as to how much tank space we need to have is, that factors in this is how far do those cows have to travel to that water. We don't want those cows, if they're traveling long distances back, to promote a situation where we've got overcrowding. So if we use that 12 to 15 inch number, that 12-foot stock tank would really have a maximum of about 30 cows to access that tank at once. So an important point to remember is a lot of times our limiting factors, if we begin to talk about water requirements, tank capacity, and tank space, is really how many cattle can go around it. We've got a tank that holds enough water to service 80 head, but when we look at that linear tank space around the circumference of that circular tank, we're really only talking about a situation where we probably shouldn't have more than 30 cows drinking out of that tank.
We should be thinking more about that access than maybe we typically do. We know that cattle will go in and out of the tank area and take turns, if you will, but the more one-time access space you have, the better off everybody is.
And as we get hotter, we all know that cattle tend to congregate around those water tanks. And so having adequate space, or maybe even in some situations, going out and purchasing another tank to make sure we've got adequate trough space out there for those cows to have access to that water, I think is a really important take-home message.
And the best you can, you want to maintain the space around the exterior of that tank so that there's good footing, they can get to the tank handily, you don't have any issues there.
That's right, and the other thing I see a lot, and it's a really common practice, is to take circular tanks and kind of butt them up together. Mm-hmm. Well, when we do that, we effectively limit, the circumference space that cattle can access. It's handy for us in terms of filling the tank, but, if we can spread those tanks out and allow cattle to gain access all the way around those tanks, that can be another simple thing that we can do in a lot of situations just to make sure we've got adequate tank space.
One additional question here, Justin. Maintaining that quality in the tank, water quality, as best one can, are there steps that one can take?
Yeah, water quality, one of the fundamental rules of animal husbandry, is we need to provide animals with a clean, fresh water source. And so the water may be fresh, but if it's put in a dirty cup, we probably didn't meet all of those criteria. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I recommend, especially if we have water that's a developed water sources, a windmill, or maybe it's a solar pump that has got a tank around it, can be a really good idea at the beginning of the grazing season to drain that tank, clean out some of the sludge from the bottom. Especially here in western Kansas, we get a lot of dust that blows. We do get wind, and it's not uncommon to find quite a bit of material at the bottom of the tank.
Well, either way, whether you're pumping on site, solar, windmill, what have you, or you're hauling water in, these are all things that one needs to take into account. And again, this article that you put together in the Beef Tips newsletter can lend some specific guidelines.
That's correct, Eric. There's just some good numbers and, things to think about, especially this year that maybe might not be at the forefront of our mind, especially coming into the beginning of the grazing season.
You can find online that article on water questions and answers for cow-calf producers in the Beef Tips newsletter that was posted just a few days ago for this month of May, and it's at ksubeef.org. Justin, we appreciate the input. Thanks, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Eric.
He is Justin Waggoner, a beef systems specialist, K-State Research and Extension. He's based out in Garden City, southwest Kansas, with those thoughts on providing quality and ample water to your cow herd during this summer upcoming on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
On this part of Agriculture Today, the first of what we're hoping will be an ongoing segment here on the broadcast, it will feature the team of researchers here at K-State that make up the Beef Cattle Institute, representing all sides of the cattle production enterprise: reproduction, nutrition, health, economics. The BCI's intent is to put together a podcast of a conversation amongst these experts regularly, taking up topics of current importance in cattle production. And the BCI has been kind enough to allow Agriculture Today to share excerpts from that podcast with you right here. We think you'll find the information they exchange insightful and informative. This first podcast features the director of the Beef Cattle Institute, K-State veterinarian Brad White, his fellow K-State veterinarian Bob Larson, K-State livestock economist Dustin Pendell, and K-State cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber. And their general topic of choice this week, cow herd reproduction. Brad White and Bob Larson get it rolling.
Bob, you were talking about some of the students you've got in class, and they're going through a bull class now?
That's right. Actually, this is a really fun time of year. I've got some senior vet students, so they're going to be graduating in just a couple of weeks. All of them have jobs. A lot of them have jobs here in Kansas, so they're going to be going into some practices here in Kansas. And we're kind of winding up their education with 2 weeks of intensive bull work. So we've talked about a lot about breeding soundness exams of bulls, but also some on health and nutrition and selection, but a lot of focus on the breeding soundness exam, which again is I think really important to assure that we have a good, successful breeding season. And we've had a couple of really interesting, so we're working with the bulls that come into the clinic here at K-State, and we've had a couple of really good learning and teaching opportunities, because we stress that you do a complete breeding soundness exam that includes a physical exam, so you're making sure the bull is healthy, particularly feet and legs, the reproductive tract, but then also a semen evaluation. And we've had a couple of really good examples where we get a semen sample, look at it under the microscope, and the motility is really good. And there are some people that will just stop at a good physical exam and motility of the semen and call that good. But when we've taken that next step, which I think is really important, which is to make a slide and look at the actual sperm shape and make sure there's no defects with those sperm cells, we've had a couple of really good examples of great motility and poor sperm shape and function.
So what causes that?
Well, in these cases, both of them were head defects, meaning that, so if you think about a sperm cell.
Not the bull's head.
Not the bull's head. If you think about a sperm cell, it's got the head and then a long tail, kind of like a tadpole. And if you have tail defects or anything that affects the swimming, that will decrease the motility. But if the tail and the swimming ability is good, but the head is misshapen and it has to do with some stress and damage to the testicles during the sperm formation, the little tadpoles can swim pretty good, but they're not going to get a cow pregnant.
Yeah. So are they going to come back from that?
Yeah, a lot of them will. One of the problems we run into is that even though bulls are pretty resilient as far as permanent infertility is pretty rare, but temporary infertility that lasts several weeks is fairly common. So that's the problem, is we want the bulls to go out and start working right now, and they're probably not really going to regain that fertility for 6-8 weeks, and that may be too late.
Yeah. So when we say interesting cases and good learning examples,
that's usually bad for someone else.
That's bad for the bull. Exactly.
Bad for the bull, bad for the producer, but for our students, it's been a great learning experience.
Kind of the, hey, y'all, watch this. Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
Bob, you were talking before as some of the questions, and one of the things we talked a little on the bull side, but also it's the time to start planning, if you haven't already planned, your sync program. And I know a lot of people have already initiated some of their sync programs, especially on heifers. You had a question come across your desk that you're going to share.
I'm on several cattle Facebook groups, mostly to provide some scientific content, but also amusement, if you will. But every once in a while, there's interesting stories about wrecks and stuff that people have. But sometimes it's the preventable wreck. And one of the questions somebody had posted was they wanted some feedback from the Facebook community about what synchronization protocol to use. They wanted to back up a group of cows into an earlier calving season, which we all know can be fairly challenging, and there's some good tools out there. And the person had a whole long list. I mean, by the time I got onto this page, there was probably already 50 or 60 comments.
So there were plenty of people
chiming in and giving their opinion. The problem with that is don't take your the lessons don't take your synchronization advice from Facebook, because several people were starting down the right path of using a cedar-based protocol that exposes cows to progestin, and that you can move cows up very rapidly. In the breeding season or calving season. The challenge was they'd specified there's 2 injections that you give in those protocols, and they'd flip the order. So they were giving prostaglandin and disastrous sort of advice. So my advice is really go get the synchronization planner from the Iowa Beef Center and use it every time you set up a group of cows.
That may be why because I get phone calls every year from veterinarians or producers where someone has done the injections on their synchronization protocol wrong. And I always wondered where that was coming from. So maybe it's all due to Facebook.
It's all due to Facebook.
There you go.
But one thing is to pick one protocol, get good at it, then you learn the ins and outs. And I think that's important because of the repro side is so critical. And I know, Dustin, you're doing some econ work there with some reproductive performance.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, I guess now, we did some work with NCBA on their National Beef Quality Audit, and so there were various aspects throughout the whole marketing chain, all the way from the cow-calf through the packing plant. And so we've been looking at different, I guess, lost opportunities, if you will, in the beef sector, whether it's from the reproductive performance all the way through excess fat. And so we're currently working on those right now. I don't necessarily have any of the numbers, but hopefully in the next couple weeks, we'll be able to start to release some of that information through NCBA and hopefully on the podcast here.
So will that be repro nationwide, regionals?
So that will be more of a nationwide. So it was the National Quality Audit would look more of it is nationwide. It's not necessarily a specific region, and it's with the entire chain. It's not a specific sector within the beef industry.
It seems like this kind of fine-tuning some of the research to look at feed efficiency on an individual basis, rather than just pen-level feedlot data. This has really kind of moved some of those questions back into the cow-calf sector, because we've talked about feed efficiency at the feedlot stage for a long time.
Right, and so the old proxies of average daily gain that we use in the feed yard work pretty well in the feed yard sector, but have some substantial consequence on the cow side in terms of increased mature weight and maintenance costs. So one of the things that we're interested in is eventually going back and doing some work to quantify differences in nutrient requirements for different mature weights and lactation potentials of beef cows by breed. So we've got 3 breeds in our unit, and the last work really done in that area was Farrell and Jenkins' work in the mid-1980s with relatively small groups. And so technology's really allowed us to move fairly rapidly in the area of feed efficiency in beef cattle, and
everybody
sort of
talks
expand our view of now it's what we don't know about feed efficiency and maintenance efficiency. Right?
Everybody talks about those easy keeper cows, and you'll actually be able to put some numbers on those.
Yep. And it'd be great to find some of those
because they do creep up in mature body weight. It seems like a lot of herds, and as we look at those cows, they've gotten bigger and bigger. And the question, if we put even if they have a bigger calf, what's the cost of keeping her for a year? Because
and there's some really great work. Dave Lallman at Oklahoma State had a paper come out a couple of years ago that looked at sort of the expected additional calf weight due to increases in cow body weight, and I think everybody was a little surprised that it's actually quite a bit less than most people think, and it's in the neighborhood of somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds of additional calf weight for every 100 pounds of cow body weight. Well, we start thinking about
that may not
probably
work
doesn't
out.
work out.
Yeah, the math doesn't work out very good in favor of that, and so particularly when you figure in the decreased stocking rate or stocking density of bigger cows, the increased risk then of reproductive failure for bigger cows. So there's really a fair bit of data to support. I'm not going to say we need to make small cows, but maybe some moderation or pulling back a little bit on, because the average cow in Kansas at body condition score 5 now weighs over 1,400 pounds.
Yeah, that's not the way it was when I first started in working.
Yep.
How big were they when you first started working?
Well, they were much smaller. Let's put it that way.
I wasn't supposed to ask a follow-up question.
No.
Dirt was new.
Dirt was brand new.
Yeah. So excellent. Well, we've really enjoyed having you with us today, and hopefully the information was useful to you. We will, again, be doing these podcasts approximately weekly. If you have questions that you'd like us to answer or things you'd like to get our opinion on, you can send us an email at bci@ksu.edu, contact us on Twitter @the_BCI, or visit our website, www.beefcattleinsitute.org. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll talk to you next time.
K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Weaber. And that's just part of the first of many podcasts to come from the Beef Cattle Institute here at Kansas State University. To access the full version of it, again, beefcattleinstitute.org. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Now this break here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly visit featuring wildlife specialist Charlie Lee of K-State Research and Extension. Spring is obviously here, Charlie, and the ticks are out. We want to focus this week on deer ticks and potential control. These are all too common, unfortunately.
Well, we not only have deer ticks or black-legged ticks, but we also have the implication of white-tailed deer being involved in the number of ticks that are out there and the problems that ticks cause, along with the relationship and problems that deer may create. So deer seem to get blame for being involved in the increasing number of Lyme disease cases. The increasing number and prevalence of Lyme disease is probably more linked to landscape patterns and deer density than anything else that we've been able to get a correlation with. The homes are being built right into the woodlands. Woodlands are now well mature. People probably are spending more time outdoors this time of year and may be in constant exposure from ticks.
And you say that individual deer can, to put it this way, shed a pretty sizable number of ticks on a regular basis.
Yeah, I've seen some estimates that deer may drop 20 ticks per day. So those are ticks that have been attached to the deer, taken a blood meal, and then dropped off to complete their reproductive cycle. Keep in mind that small mammals are also a role for hosts for the disease as well. Particularly, it's in the first year of the tick's life cycle that those small rodents, including deer mice, even birds, are important. But it's deer that really gives that transportation and that last blood meal to the adult tick. And the overabundance of deer in some locations has caused a considerable amount of concern, and people are looking for strategies to help deal with that incidence of Lyme disease.
Some of those previously tested strategies, what would those be then?
Well, one is to exclude deer from an area. Deer fencing can be a fairly effective method on small tracts. There's some research that shows high-tensile electric deer fences on small properties less than 15 acres in size can reduce both nymph and adult tick numbers by up to 85%. So if you can keep the deer out of an area, eventually you're going to reduce the tick numbers. Another is to treat the deer. You can use topical application of acaricides to both fenced and free-ranging populations of white-tailed deer. That decreases the abundance of lone star ticks and black-legged ticks on those deer. There is a device called a four-poster. It's a feeding device that's got a bin that holds corn, and then it's got 4 rollers on it that apply a pesticide, which is 10% permethrin, that kills the ticks that are on the deer when they feed. There is some costs associated with that, not only of feeding the deer, but also for the device and the personnel to apply it and maintain it. But in a 5-state multi-year project of neighborhoods where those were used, it reduced black-legged ticks roughly about 70% over 5 years of use. So those have some application. The other one is simply use deer reduction. Reducing deer density to about 13 deer per square mile shows a reduction of 76% in tick abundance and a reduction in 80% in reported Lyme disease. And that's a 13-year study, so it certainly has numbers to back that up. So there's lots of reasons that we have lots of ticks. Those are some of the deer management strategies that are important that can be utilized to try to reduce those numbers of ticks.
But we do want to mention one more and new product out, which has just gone through an independent evaluation. What's this, and will it be effective against tick distribution?
Well, it's called the Select Tick Control System. It's actually a bait box that is put out to reduce the exposure to the black-legged tick in Lyme disease endemic areas. It was tested in New Jersey. Initially, it came out and was commercially available as a product called Max Force Tick Management System. It's a small bait box that tracks small rodents into that box, where the rodents then are treated with a pesticide that kills the ticks. They've had some problems initially with the construction of the bait boxes and had rodents, including eastern chipmunks and squirrels, that chewed the bait boxes, and so they had to kind of redesign that. Now a different company has bought the rights to that particular product and are marketing it as the Select Tick Control System. It's a bait box that now has been fortified with galvanized sheet metal on the tops and bottom and corners to make it a little bit more secure to non-target organisms that are out there, like raccoons and squirrels and chipmunks that may chew into the box. With the new boxes, they've kind of eliminated that non-target wildlife damage, and it seems to be a product that shows a significant reduction in ticks while reducing the amount of pesticide that you may be used if you're trying to do an area-wide treatment of your yard or landscape. Those bait boxes got some other benefits. They reduce the number of subadult ticks that are feeding in there, but the bait boxes also have the potential to reduce the infection that those ticks might cause.
So that's a worthwhile option to consider, but in any event, homeowners, landowners can do something to try to reduce those tick numbers out there.
Yeah, there's lots of ways other than just staying indoors, but it starts with kind of doing landscape management, can include small rodent management, large animal management like deer, and then finally treating the ticks themselves.
Well, those are some thoughts on deer, ticks, and managing to reduce their numbers out there. And Charlie, thanks for the word on this, timely for this time of the season, to be sure. That's Charlie Lee, Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. That's our time for today. Again, if you'd like to listen to a podcast version of our broadcast, go to agtoday.net, or if you use your podcast app on your mobile device, type in Agriculture Today, Kansas as keywords, tap the subscribe button, and each new episode of the program will automatically arrive on your device every weekday. Otherwise, rejoin us right here this same time tomorrow, won't you? Meantime, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over this, the K-State Radio Network.